Hello, and welcome to my presentation called Water for All. I am looking at the potential lack of fresh water for agriculture to produce food with the increased population by 2050. I started this research by looking for an extremist point of view and came across the voluntary human extinction movement. It was silly, the website was silly, but it had a few valid points that overpopulation is going to overtax pretty much every aspect of Earth. So I chose water. So current water policies are confusing, have loopholes, and are outdated. For the confusing aspect, we start off with the eastern half of the United States with the riparian doctrine. This doctrine states that if you have land adjacent or property adjacent to the riparian zone, you have access to the water. The western half of the United States has the prior appropriation doctrine, which boils down to first come, first served. States further adapt these doctrines to meet their specific needs. So there is a bunch of variability of states' policy, with states' water policies, and very little joint water management between the states. The Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act are my examples for loopholes. The Safe Drinking Water Act has a loophole called for oil and gas corporations called the Halliburton loophole, and the Clean Water Act does not or did not cover wetlands and non-navigable waters. I do believe Obama put those in to be protected, and Trump is trying to get those removed. And most current water policies are outdated and based off of data from 100 years ago, such as with the Colorado River example. The Colorado River Compact of 1922 is almost 100 years old. It used measurements from the previous 5 years, which had been unusually wet. This made for overgenerous allocations. In reality, the river ran at a much lower level. Even with this knowledge, they still have not adjusted the allotment amount, and the river is expected to be dry by 2050. And currently, the Colorado River also no longer reaches the Gulf of Mexico, so this progress is occurring already. Another issue is that there isn't a standardized way to measure water quantities. This again varies from state to state, but the rivers, aquifers, and basins they are measuring does not. This results in different measurements and increases the likelihood of overpromising scarce water resources. The USGS is undertaking a water census survey to measure all the sources of water with the same method, with the eventual hope of standardizing this nationwide. Armed with a more accurate inventory, water managers and policymakers can make better decisions which reflect actual quantities. The depletion of fresh water is due to several reasons. Inaccurate allocations is leading to the depletion of surface waters. Dried up surface waters is leading to an increased groundwater pumping. Other causes of freshwater depletion is from changing weather patterns. Many places are getting the same amount of precipitation, but as rain and not snow. The lack of snow is also leading to glaciers retreating. Both of these factors, the less snow and retreating glaciers, are causing rivers to dry up by the summer. Many rivers depend on snowfields and glaciers as a source of water during the hot, dry summer months. Plus, there are increased dry spells causing water scarcity. This water scarcity is causing many communities to hunt for new sources of water to try to implement basin water transfers, such as with the Owens River Valley and Las Vegas. Ironically, the emerging weather pattern also results in more flooding, most notably during the cool season months. Lately, the trend has been for this flooding to occur earlier every year. Now, the peak water supply from flooding is coming too early to be available for farming, and therefore irrigation water must come from groundwater. One solution for the offset between water supply and agricultural needs is the use of dams to impound the water. Dams do a good job at storing the water for use later in the year and can be used for power generation. But dams drastically alter river ecosystems and threaten native species. Although there are ways to adjust for the threat to native species, such as building fish ladders, but this tends to be very costly. Currently, the trend is to actually decommission older dams to restore rivers to their previous flows. "70% of fresh water is used for irrigation, although some sources stated this as high as 92% is used for irrigation. Agricultural water requirements will only increase as the years progress due to an increased need for food, increased production on remaining land, and farming on marginally acceptable land. Demands currently are already overtaxing rivers and shrinking aquifers. Such an example is the Ogallala Aquifer, which supplies farms on the Great Plains. This region is also known as the breadbasket of America. This aquifer is being what is called mined, which means the water is being used faster than it can recharge. Most of this water is going towards irrigation. So if we run out of water, we'll have no more farms, and there goes our breadbasket. Currently, there are 7.5 billion people in the world, and this is expected to grow to between 9 to 12 billion by 2050. Over 80% of this population will be living in the developing countries, and less than 20% will be living in developed countries. There is an obvious association between having more people means more water needs more food, and more land. In order to feed the 9 to 12 billion people, food production will have to almost double. But urban sprawl is eating up farmland and pushing farming into less than ideal soils and/or climates. This requires more water and decreases the yield. Expecting more production from the same amount of land or trying to get higher yields from poor growing conditions will also require the use of more fertilizer. There is only so much fresh water. It is a fixed amount, and many areas around the globe are already tapped out. And with the lack of water supply also limits food. Is where things take a turn for the worse. Limited water, of course, limits food production, and that increases crop failures. The lack of financial resources in many developing countries equates to not having the infrastructure such as water treatment facilities. Therefore, the limited water also means there is limited safe drinking water and increases the chance of waterborne diseases such as cholera and typhoid. Currently, there are 3.4 billion people who do not have access to safe drinking water. That's almost half the world's population. People desperate for water will become a major aggravating factor in many regions around the globe to cause conflicts within countries and between countries. Also, there is a concern that stronger countries will start to withhold water for themselves and deprive other countries of water in that area. Intelligence and defense agencies are actually keeping an eye on regions around the globe which are already experiencing limited resource conflicts. Although the places were not named, the countries themselves were not named, they hinted to regions of the African and Asian continent. The naysayers. Those who think that nothing needs to change. Resistance to changing policies are coming from people or industries who are benefiting from the current policies regardless of the realities of water supply. There are also those who claim that humans are somehow not subjected to the same restrictions and carrying capacities as other animals, and therefore we should be able to reproduce infinitely with no consequence. Then there are those who might admit something is going astray, but claim that technology and innovation will fix all of our problems so we don't need to monitor our use of resources. And my favorite, we'll be able to replace natural resources with man-made ones. I don't know how they're going to do that. New policies in the future will need to address conservation measures in order to save water, although many will be costly to implement. There can be improved irrigation methods, such as drip irrigation, to be able to reduce the amount of water. Cities can fix their leaking water pipes, as an estimated 30 to 50% of water is being lost this way. Again, this will be quite costly, as it is estimated to cost $472 billion over the next 20 years to fix the leaking infrastructure in the United States alone. Some policies might be able to increase the cost of water to control how people use this source. Building more dams to catch early spring runoffs, was mentioned before, is another option. Desalination plants is another option, but requires being next to the ocean, and it's a costly investment again. This one got me. Eat less meat. It turns out it takes almost 8 times more water per calorie for an animal product than it does for fruits and vegetable products. Population control is another option, although it is taboo in many regions and religions, but would actually have the greatest effect at controlling our use of resources such as water. There are many ingrained cultural reasons for people having large families, which may or may not be beneficial in the upcoming decades. Policymakers are afraid to attempt this idea, mostly due to claims of racism, as many regions with exponential population growth are in Africa. Conclusions. Current water use policies are already drying up streams and depleting groundwater sources. But with a growing population, agriculture will need all available resources in order to get and maintain high yields to feed everyone. But the reality is there is a limited amount of land and a limited amount of water for its use. This problem has been recognized by some, but the issue is too far in the future for many to consider a problem. As one of those interviewed in the Arid Lands documentary made the comment that people only see 4 years out, so this won't become a problem until 2046. The dwindling basic resources, such as food and water, are causing clashes which could easily lead to civil wars, if not international wars. In the meantime, there will be increased incidences of famines and epidemics due to the lack of water. Photo credit and a bunch of excited. Thanks for listening.